What if it was possible to have local, fresh groceries delivered right to your door? Think of all the free time you'd have. Well, Instacart gives unlimited grocery delivery for one low monthly fee. Forgot that special ingredient in your favorite dish? Instacart can deliver it to your front door in as fast as 1 hour. You can shop multiple stores, see deals in your area, and save time and money. I've been using Instacart for over 3 years. I started using them in Arizona, and I'm using them here in Florida. I love the time-saving convenience. They pick the freshest products, and they keep my eggs safe too. To receive your first delivery free, follow the link in the show notes so that Instacart knows that we sent you and to help support the show. Instacart. Never step foot in a grocery store again. Welcome to Empowered Within, a soul-quenching, transformational podcast that will set your soul on fire through candid and inspiring conversations. Leading experts, celebrities, healers, and I share our journeys of how we've overcome challenges to living an empowered life from within. I'm your host, Jennifer Pilates. Welcome to another episode of Empowered Within. Hi there, and welcome to the show. I am honored to have with us today Brian Russell. He is an award-winning professor of biblical studies at Ashbury Theological Seminary and a transformational coach for pastors and spiritually minded professionals. He's also an ordained minister and has served faith communities in Kentucky, Virginia, and Florida. His personal mission is to seek out, study, and embody the deepest truths about God so that he can share them compellingly, lovingly, and transformationally with others. He is the author of Invitation, a Bible study to begin with, Realigning with God, and his most recent release, Centering Prayer, Sitting Quietly in God's Presence Can Change Your Life. He is also the podcast host of Deep Dive Spirituality Conversations. Welcome to the show, Brian. I'm so honored to have you with us today.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's so great to be with you today.
First and foremost, congratulations on your release of your newest book. How does it feel?
Oh, it actually feels fantastic. And it's not always easy to say that because sometimes I've written a book, it hasn't felt great, but this was a blessing all the way through from the opening words when I first started writing and even till now trying to get the word out on it. So it's been wonderful.
Oh, that is so great to hear. So tell us, how did your spiritual path begin for you?
Yeah, well, my spiritual path, began when I was a child. It is really interesting. My mom and dad, who didn't grow up with any kind of spirituality at all, they actually were converted at like a Billy Graham crusade, if you can believe that. That was back in the 70s. It was one of his associates, but it was like one of these big evangelistic things. They started going to church, and so my brother and I grew up in the church, and so had deep roots. So I've been going to church more or less since I was 5 years old. But I've had obviously multiple experiences over the years, but I've been kind of a lifer.
That's wonderful. And what brought you to the moment of writing Centering Prayer?
Yeah, and that gets to the heart of it. At that point, I wrote when I got to begin to write the book. This goes back about 11 years ago. First marriage ended. I'd been married for 20 years at that point, and that was just a devastating experience. At that point, I'd already been a pastor. I was a seminary professor, and that just sent me into a faith crisis, really. So, in a sense, I can say my faith journey started when I was 5, but at another level, at the present place I'm at, started about 11 years ago, coming out of essentially a dark night of the soul experience. This relational crisis and. There's financial crises involved. That was probably the worst thing that's ever happened to me personally. And that sent me looking for alternatives to what I'd already known. Because when I was going through the whole divorce and the reboots, I couldn't really pray, nor like I couldn't sing. I teach biblical studies, but reading the Bible wasn't doing anything for me. And even all my pastor friends, I was essentially kind of unconsolable because my faith had been built in at some level, maybe in unhealthy ways, even into my previous relationship. And now it was gone. And I just had this huge void. And that's when I really discovered meditation practices and these silence and solitude practices. I do a lot of journaling also, but I discovered centering prayer, and I started doing really intentional journaling, and that's slowly healed me and allowed me to begin to reboot. And started writing the book a few years ago, as I was reflecting backwards. It's always good to measure backwards where you've come from, and realized what had happened, and tried to write a book to capture my experiences, and then also to help other people with the practice that I've found so, central to my own present levels of spirituality.
Wow. It is so amazing that such a beautiful book came out of all of that. Will you explain to our listeners exactly what centering prayer is and how we practice, how that's different than a traditional meditation?
Yeah, it does have some things in common with traditional meditation. It's probably the closest to a mindfulness-based meditation, which kind of comes out of a Buddhist tradition where you pay attention to your breath. The difference would be centering prayer is silent meditative prayer. It's rooted in the Christian faith, which really the only difference is that, the idea is that you're actually sitting, not really just to look inside or to pay attention to your breath, but you're hoping to sit with God. But the practice is pretty simple to explain, but anybody that's ever tried meditation knows it's kind of easy to know what you're supposed to do. It's a whole nother thing actually doing it consistently. So what centering prayer is, and I say, try to do it for 20 minutes, but you can do it for any amount of time. So you want to find a comfortable place where you can sit. It needs to be fairly quiet just so you're not getting interrupted. Close your eyes and you pick a prayer word, which is, it's not a mantra, but you're going to use a prayer word. Like you could use God. I use Jesus because, I'm a Christian, but you can use thank you, abundance, love, just some word that, and this is where it's like the mindfulness, like in mindfulness, when you realize you're in a thought or you're thinking, which will be most of the time, you just kind of go back and pay attention to your breath going through your nose. With centering prayer, you use the prayer word. So you don't really worry about your breathing at all. But when you realize you're in a thought, I just say to myself, Jesus, and that resets my intention, which is to sit with God and surrender my thoughts when I become aware of them. And so that really is the practice. And I can say more than that, but that's the basic idea, is that you're pay attention when you realize you're in a thought, use your prayer word to recenter yourself. That's where the centering idea comes from.
I love that. In your book, you talk about the 4 R's, because when we are sitting there, all of a sudden thoughts come in, and good things, bad things, all sorts of stuff. Describe the R's so that our listeners know this is something that can really help you in those moments. What do you do when the thoughts come into your head?
Yeah, thank you. And the 4 R's is kind of the classic advice for the thoughts. And the 4 R's, I'll say them really fast, and I'll just say a couple things about each one. It's resist no thought, retain no thought, react to no thought, gently return to the sacred word. And the idea is, it's kind of like what you just said. The idea of resisting thoughts is just to remind ourselves when we're doing this form of prayer that you're going to be thinking all the time. So it's not, the goal isn't to turn the mind off. And in fact, you just don't resist. You just realize you're going to have thoughts going through your mind. And the resist part's pretty easy with, like if you hear a bird chirping, like, oh, there's a bird. Well, that's a thought. Or I wonder if I set my timer. That's the thought. So a lot of the thoughts are just kind of nonsense, no big deal. The retain part comes in because there's going to be some thoughts that you'll like, oh, I hope I can remember that. I write. So sometimes I'll get a really inspirational idea for maybe a blog post. But when I'm doing the silent meditative prayer, it's like, no, I just need to release even a good thought. That's the retain part, things that you might want to remember. Maybe you get an insight. And I always just tell folks, trust the process. So even if you get this wonderful, inspiring thought, just trust God that it's going to come back later and just let it go. So those are the resist part. That's pretty easy. Retain, a little trickier. Now the react, this is where the healing can take place, Jennifer. And you've looked at my book and I'm pretty transparent about some of the stuff that I had to deal with on my interior life. But the react no thought is when you sit, and this would be true of any form of meditation, because I've talked to other, persons that do different types. The thing that's kind of that we don't always hear about, well, everybody says you should meditate. Well, the scary part about meditation is if you do it long enough, you're going to see parts of yourself that are pretty painful. You see your past traumas can come up in your mind, feelings, fears, guilt, shame, all these sorts of things that tend to kind of hold us captive. And it's easy to want to push that stuff back down like it's not in you. And so the react to no thought is really important, because the way that, in my mind, God heals us through this practice is when those really painful or embarrassing or shame-filled kind of memories come up. Don't push them back down, but just use the prayer word and let them go to God. And that sort of unclogs our pipes, if you will. But we have to remind ourselves. And then the last R is, what do you do whenever you have a thought? You just gently, and that's the key thing, gently, just let it go. Let God have the thought and return back to the sacred word. So thanks for that question, because I think that's the classic advice for how to do the practice.
Yeah, and that's great advice, and definitely lots of practice to get there with it all. Time-wise, when you're doing your centering prayer, how do you do it? Once a day, 10 minutes, 20 minutes? What is your suggestion for people that would like to start?
Yeah. And I guess, if you can, I would suggest trying to go all the way to 20 minutes right off the bat. Now, if you've never sat in silence, 20 minutes can feel like 10 hours sometimes. And I'll have to say, honestly, for myself, I'm a very type A thought. My brain is always buzzing. So when I started with just trying to do 5 minutes, and that seemed like hours when I first started. But what I found is once I did 20, I almost always do 20 now. I mean, there's sometimes when you just don't have time, but because what the longer time does, even though it's difficult, is you actually will battle your thoughts for a good chunk of the session. Then at a certain point, and it's usually close to the end, I find you start getting more spaces where it's like you kind of lock in. So sometimes if you only do it a short time, which again, if that's all you have time to do, I'd encourage people to even do it 1 minute if they can. You may just be battling your thoughts the whole time. And so I'd say try to go for 20. What I do with mine is I always do it in the morning for sure. And since the COVID lockdown, my wife's been home, we do it together. So we wake up, have a cup of coffee, and then we do centering prayer within, 15 minutes of waking up basically in the morning. And that's what I would do if she was working too. And then I do find I will do other sessions during the day. I don't always, but especially when I'm having a difficult day, I actually will take the time to do kind of a decompression 20 minutes at night too. And, and I have friends that do the bookend days every single day. That's not what I always do, so I don't want to be dishonest to the listeners, but some people find that really helpful. And I would basically say just pick a time, because I don't think there's a right or a wrong time. The key thing is practicing and finding the space in your day that works for you, because this practice will reward you if you commit to it for a season. So you got to find the time when it's going to work for you.
Right. That's great advice. Why do you feel it is so imperative right now that collectively we take on centering prayer?
I think right now, this whole COVID-19 pandemic has forced us to be so much more isolated than we have been previously. I mean, we're talking on Zoom, and that's what a lot of people were getting their interactions, and it's fine, but you're not really, even though we're seeing each other, that's not the same as being in the same room and stuff. And so we're more isolated. And all this isolation, and we've seen it, our world, we have more divisions politically, racially, and we don't have to name all the problems, but in a real sense, these silence and solitude practices work on our insides to help us kind of unclog emotionally so we can actually be calm and present in our world, which is what our world desperately needs. So I would say our world needs this because we need more people that can essentially show up in life, not be in the past, not be in the future, but just show up and then pay attention. And, and as a person of faith, I believe God has way more invested in everything than I do or you do. And so I just need to be present. And centering prayer is a practice that, that literally has turned me from being this professor that was living in his head all the time to be able to, like this conversation that we're having. I wouldn't have been able to do this. Well, I could have done something like this, but it's so much more natural for me to show up and just listen to the person that I'm speaking with and that's what our world needs, right? We need to listen to each other and then be part of the solution. So that's how I would answer the question.
That's really great. And I agree with you. I think there's been so much separation that coming together would be nice, and for everyone to be able to show up and discern and not react would be amazing. If a quarter of the world could do that right now, that would be so amazing for us. I think it would really help to shift the paradigm quite a bit. What if it was possible to have local, fresh groceries delivered right to your door? Think of all the free time you'd have. Well, Instacart gives unlimited grocery delivery for one low monthly fee. Forgot that special ingredient in your favorite dish? Instacart can deliver it to your front door in as fast as 1 hour. You can shop multiple stores, see deals in your area, and save time and money. I've been using Instacart for over 3 years. I started using them in Arizona, and I'm using them here in Florida. I love the time-saving convenience. They pick the freshest products, and they keep my eggs safe too. To receive your first delivery free, follow the link in the show notes so that Instacart knows that we sent you, and to help support the show. Instacart, never step foot in a grocery store again. Throughout the book, you have this theme, and we'll call them 3 goals, if that's okay. Love of God, love thy neighbor, and love for self.
Yeah.
Will you expand on those?
Yeah, in the first 2, I mean, this has come straight out of the Bible, and even in the Torah. So Christians and Jews would share these 2 pieces. The great command is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. So that's where the love God comes from. Then the other piece is love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus recaptures those and says that's the whole law and the prophets wrapped up. So essentially, that's the core message of what we could say of Judaism and Christianity, if you will. But the challenge of that is, we can all say that as a slogan, love God, love neighbor. But oftentimes we end up, we're divided both in our attempts to love God. We elevate other things that aren't God in the same places where God would be. And then we don't always love our neighbor because we see all this injustice in the world as well. And I like to throw in the love of yourself, which sometimes sounds surprising, but I caught myself, like I've always said, what's the summary of the Bible? It's love God, love neighbor. And then I was thinking, like, why don't I ever say love your neighbor as yourself? And I kind of caught myself realizing, like, you know what? I don't actually think I love myself. And I don't mean that in a narcissistic way, because obviously that would be the opposite of the thing what we're talking about. But there's a mystic from the medieval period, and this shows up in my book. His name was Bernard of Clairvaux. And he has these 4 levels of love, with the highest one being being a little bit of surprise. He said the highest form of love is loving yourself for the sake of God. And so I made that the theme, and I thought, wow, because when I've done centering prayer, the thing that actually changed me, and I think this would change really anybody that would do it, and that's kind of the promise of my book, Sitting Quietly in God's Presence Will Change Your Life, is it's the experience of being 100% loved and knowing it deep on the inside. And when you realize that God loves you, that opens you up, because you're like, oh my gosh, God even loves these dark parts of myself, these shadow pieces that I have. And so then you can begin to see yourself as God sees you. So God can see Brian or Jennifer, we're son or daughter of God, right? And so that just changes everything. And then what do I do in response? Well, I'm going to love God back. And because I can love God and I know God loves everybody, that then allows me to love other people just as much as I love myself. Now, not more than I love myself. That's the important thing, because if you try to love people more than you love yourself, which is what a lot of my life probably was previously, you just burn out, because you can't give what you don't have, right? And so I don't know if I'm answering your question, but that's what I was trying to get at in the book, that the heart of spirituality is to be transformed by love, and essentially, in my brain, spend all eternity growing deeper and deeper in love. And I don't think we're ever going to exhaust the potential to grow and learn more about what it means to love God, love others, and even love ourselves.
Right. I think that's the ultimate healing, and we certainly all could use that in the world right now.
Yeah. Amen. Yes.
Amen to that. You touched a little bit on, shall we say, the darker side, the shadow side. Will you explain that to some of our listeners who may go, well, wait, what's that?
Well, I think, it's, you could talk, a phrase I used, I don't think this didn't show up in my book, but I come up with it since I wrote the book, is I do some coaching, and one of my clients, I always talk about fear, guilt, and shame. And one of my clients goes, oh, that sounds like the unholy trinity. And I'm like, well, that's a great thing to call that. And so what I would say is, most of us on our insides, when it gets really quiet, and this is why silence is so powerful, because most of the time we listen to music, or we're working, or we're doing something. But when you sit quietly, all your deep-rooted kind of junk is there for you. And when I talk about shadow, some of this is things that we've done ourselves, right? So, we do things that we shouldn't have done. And that's where, guilt will come from. But a lot of us carry a lot of shame, and shame isn't caused by something that we've done. A lot of times that's because we were victims of something, right? So like maybe you were picked on when you were a kid. You had some kind of abuse, a horrible accident. Maybe you were in a war, so you have like PTSD or something. There's this deep-rooted pain and shame that's there that just says there's something fundamentally wrong with me. Some of those feelings will come up when you're doing centering prayer or any kind of silence practice. And again, do we push it down or do we let it go? Our guilt will come up. And then our fears. Most of us are afraid of stuff. And, the COVID, again, it's been super easy to see fears, right? We saw, wherever you are on the political spectrum, we've demonized the other side because we're afraid of what they're going to do if they're in power. We're afraid we're going to lose our jobs. We're afraid we won't have enough retirement. We're afraid we won't have food. You can just put all that stuff up. All that stuff is buried on inside of us. And so another way to think about it is, it's the fear that I don't have enough. That would be fear. That's fear itself. I don't do enough. That's guilt. And I'm just not good enough would be shame. And all of us, at least I haven't met anybody that doesn't struggle with at least one of those things. And centering prayer brings it up. And that would be part of the dark side. And the other stuff that you could also say is the dark side would be, it's like, who did you have to become to get the love that you needed in the world? Like you can even say, like, with your what parent's love did you crave the most, and what did you have to do to get it? And that doesn't have to be anything bad that you had to do, but a lot of times we just give up certain parts of ourselves and we take on this persona. But there's a great loss when you do that, and you've lost some essential part of your own soul, and that bubbles up in the centering prayer. It's an invitation to become your truest self. And so part of this shadow work is just discovering the real you, the person that God loves 100%, warts and all. And silence heals us by bringing that to light.
Are you ready to lose inches, increase strength, and tone your body from head to toe? Are you ready for a total body, mind, and spirit transformation? I am excited to announce that I am launching my exclusive 8-week Pilates Return to Life training program. This will give you an opportunity to have a total body, mind, and spirit transformation of health and wellness to a new lifestyle. Imagine in 7 days you will feel a difference, in 14 days you will see a difference, and in 8 weeks you will have your new Pilates body. So what do you say? Want to join me on the mat? Head over to jenniferpilates.com today. Space is limited. Use this special promo code EW and the word special, EW special, to receive $200 off while space is available. Head on over to jenniferpilates.com and I'll see you on the mat. That's beautiful. And do you feel then that part that you spoke of earlier during the hours, by bringing, when this comes up, we're not to hold on to it. That's that important part of surrendering to God and let God take care of it. And thus the healing.
Absolutely. Yeah. The healing is learning, like I said this in the book, and this is kind of embarrassing, but I don't mind just sharing, just because, like when I was first sitting in silence, two things came up. And by the way, this also gets rooted. I guess I could have answered your question by talking about like the 7 deadly sins or whatever too, that float around in there. But when I first started doing silence and solitude, I would do it out on my back patio, and I was looking over this beautiful lake. And then like for a long time, I just realized I would get all these, I'd be replaying tapes of people that had done me wrong, just these memories. And I just realized how mad I was. And I'd be just, instead of meditating and, using my prayer word, I'm just sitting there mad. And so, I would say God showed me how angry I actually was. And so part of it wasn't trying to deny that. It was just learning to let that go. And, and what's interesting, when the 7 deadly sins comes out of the desert tradition, when in the early church, certain Christians wanted to take a deeper level. So they thought, we're going to leave everything behind and go out in the desert and just be monks. And men and women did this. And what was funny is they get out in the desert, they're all by themselves, and they realized that all the bad stuff was inside of them. It wasn't back in Rome or something. And so that's where the 7 deadly sins. So it's things like greed, lust, anger, sadness, sloth, pride, vainglory, and gluttony. But those come out of those gets kind of spoofed in like Netflix shows and even horror movies. But what those really are, those are attitudes, and those are parts of ourselves. And that's the stuff that will come up. And those are the things that probably hinder us from growing and living as that person that God wants us to be, this loving person. And we all will struggle with maybe all of them at some point, but usually it's one of those things will really be bothering us at any given time. And in the silence, those things will come up.
Right. And it's okay that they come up, because that's where we want to heal and release and move on.
Yeah. And for me in my inner space, I was thinking like with his anger. And then I was also having like lustful thoughts when I was sitting out there, and I was thinking, boy, isn't this ironic? I'm supposed to be sitting with God and I'm thinking about sex, or I'm just mad. And then I realized, I'm like, well, geez, God already knows what I'm thinking, because God knows everything. And, and I don't know if I really thought this, but I like to say this because it's kind of funny. It's like, I didn't get hit with a lightning bolt at that moment. So it was more like, oh, wow, I'm not being condemned. So I don't need to condemn myself for this either. I just need to lift it up with the prayer word. And that is literally the healing that takes place, is just realizing that God isn't condemning you. You just got to release the junk on the inside. Right. And a therapist can help you with that too. But this is kind of like some of the centering prayer authors call this the divine therapy, that God is kind of your therapist, and you just let it go and give it to him.
Right. And for someone out there who's saying, well, Brian, that sounds really good, but you have no idea what Joe did to me.
Yeah.
What do you say to those people? Because there is, and you touch on this in your book as well, there's something very special about forgiveness.
Yeah. Well, and I would say, if I was talking to somebody, I would say, I don't know what, Joe did to you, and I'm super sorry for that. And then, and I would just encourage a person to sit and slowly, if, forgiveness is important. You don't want to make forgiveness like this thing to make you feel bad about. But what it is, if the things continue to kind of float up in your mind, it's just about letting go. And it's real important when we talk about forgiveness, that forgiveness isn't excusing the wrong that was done. And in fact, and the other important thing, a lot of times we make the mistake, is forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation necessarily, because forgiveness is the gift essentially that we're giving ourselves. Because forgiveness is another way of, we unclog ourselves, because otherwise it's like you're just poisoning yourself. It's like, I've needed to forgive multiple people in my life. And sometimes you have to do it over time. And so in a sense, the centering prayer is a moment if you continue to get like this trauma or this person that hurt you really bad flashing in front of you. I'm not saying that's going to go away, but what it is, you just give it to God. And this is where trust comes in, because it's not like you snap your fingers and it makes bad memories go away. That just doesn't, life doesn't work like that. But what it does is when you can kind of metaphorically just let it go, you're changed. And what you're doing is then you're trusting God that over time, your feelings are going to come back into alignment too. But there is something just to make that decision. I'm going to say my prayer word. I'm going to recenter. I'm just going to give this to God versus holding on to the bitterness, because that is the whole thing. If we don't forgive. And again, there's no timetable. So I don't make anybody feel bad that they have a hard time forgiving somebody, because that's deep work. But the centering prayer is a tool that over time, well, I would think it would make it a little bit easier, because it's just a matter of letting it go. And you're doing that in the presence of a God who loves you. It's basically holding arms wide open for you. And that's the kind of context where it's easier to let something go. But that doesn't mean if you've been abused or traumatized that you're going to run over and give the person that did that a hug. It's not. You're just trying to release that pain out of your own life. And if they want to change and it's safe, reconciliation is a whole nother conversation.
All right. I think that's really great that you touched on that, because not many people touch on that when you're talking about forgive, it heals you. And then people always think about, well, if I have to forgive, then I'm allowing that person in my life. And I love how you touch on the fact that that's not always the way.
Yeah, as a pastor in the past, even as a professor, I know a lot of people that have been sexually abused, both men and women. And I would never tell a person that's, experienced that you have to go reconcile with the person, because that would, to me, would be re-traumatizing a person. But it is important to get to the point where you can forgive, at least on your side. And then again, long term, if there's a way, sure. But there's certain things that, it's just this, to forgive somebody doesn't mean I'm going to put myself back in a dangerous position. And it wouldn't mean I've known persons that then they have kids and do I let my kids around my father? It's well, no. And I don't mean that. I'm not even laughing. It's more wow, yeah, don't even think that. It's not safe unless that person's legit changed and you 100% trust them. Because it's there's no, you have to protect yourself. You can still forgive without being reconciled in certain situations.
Right. You always want to be safe first and foremost, mentally and physically, because it could be anything. It could be drugs. It could be alcohol. It could be narcissism. It could be, the list goes on in our world.
Yeah. There's that's the thing. Our world is full of so much pain right now. That forgiveness is a real gift because it frees us up, and we just need to help people as much as possible to let things go themselves, simply so they can be healed helpers, if you will.
That's a great
or
sentiment.
Wounded healers, I guess.
Wounded healers. That's real. Yeah, that's a great sentiment. Brian, when you look back over your years, is there one moment that you are most proud of?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. There's one moment that I'm most proud of. I think you stumped me here, Jennifer. Let's see. I guess let me start with a recent. Yeah, you know what? The moment I would probably be the most proud of is, and this is fairly recent. I'm actually proud of myself for actually moving in to coaching and action, because I was worked with a lot of students, and obviously I'm still a professor, but I actually decided to take a decision and put myself out there at risk and see if I could begin to have my own business. And again, I'm still getting started on that, but it's gone really well. And that was my old mild-mannered, shy professor has stepped into more of this business role. And that was a big stretch for me. So I'm kind of proud of myself for that. Now, again, I could go back and name a lot of things that I've been proud of, but that would be the most recent thing. Is just, I feel like I'm stepping in to my authentic self, and I'm less worried about what people actually are thinking instead of just trying to please folks. So that would be the proudest moment, I think, for me.
That's great. Congratulations. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'm so happy for you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So, Brian, we're coming to that time in the show where I ask this one question. You think that one stumped you? Boy, do I have one for you.
Oh, this is going to be fun. I love it.
Okay, Brian, what is one thing that no one knows about you?
Oh, boy.
I warned you.
Well, again, now no one, that's a tricky one at 52 these days. I guess, you know what, I bet you this would be something that a lot of people wouldn't expect from me, since I'm a seminary professor and stuff, is it's I love heavy metal music, and I can play heavy metal 80s guitar, and I have, my electric guitar. So a lot of people don't actually know that about me. I love really hard, heavy metal.
How cool is that? So you actually play an electric guitar?
Oh yeah, yeah. I have acoustic and electric. Yeah, I've played since I was a kid. I always wanted to be a rock star when I was growing up. I mean, so maybe that was what nobody ever knew about me too. But it would be the music probably that most people don't know that about me.
How cool. Do you have a favorite go-to song that you like to play?
When I play the guitar, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess, I think if I really just want to rock out, I like to play. Well, there's probably a couple of them just because they're really fun. I like to play a Metallica song, Fade to Black. And I also like to play, and then this song's kind of embarrassed. This one's a little bit of a raunchy song, but if you just take the music, it's good. I like Stranglehold by Ted Nugent. It's super loud, and it's just and I've played that one for years, and that's a blast just to play because you can just let the guitar scream. Those would be my two really heavy songs that I like to play.
How cool. Didn't see this coming. I love it. Oh, Brian, how fun. Now, Brian, tell our listeners where they can reach you, find your book, so that they too can learn the power of centering prayer.
Probably the easiest place to find the book would just be going on Amazon. And if you type in Centering Prayer and Brian or Brian Russell, it'll pop right up. Now, if you want to find out more about me, I have a one-stop website that's pretty new. It's Brian Russell, and Russell's with two S's and two L's, phd.com. So brianrussellphd.com, and everything about me is located there. You can find the coaching, other books I've written, my podcast, and I'm getting a blog going on there too.
Great. Congratulations for that as well. And as always, all of Brian's contact information will be over in the show notes at jenniferpilates.com. Brian, thank you so much for being here today, for sharing your book with me, which was so touching to the heart to read and just so wonderful to learn a new kind of different way to meditate and to have a good conversation with God and to really just come into love and loving self. I think that's beautiful that you're sharing that with all of us. I thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. And I love the questions, and thanks for a really engaging conversation, and just blessings. If I can ever be of any service to you, just reach out to, because I'd love to, have a chance to pay back the kindness that you're showing me by letting me be on your show.
Thank you, Brian. I'm always here to support you. Well, as we say, until next time. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to Empowered Within with Jennifer Pilates. Your feedback is important. It helps me to connect with you and gives me insight into who you are and what you're enjoying about the show. For today's show notes and discount codes from today's sponsors, head over to jenniferpilates.com. Until next time, may you live an empowered life from within.